We'll reconvene the meeting. It is 1:04. And Mr. Sweet, can we just do a quick roll call to establish quorum?
Sure. Dr. Paris,
Present.
Dr. Adams,
Present.
Mr. Sweet, I am present. Ms. Cruz,
Present.
Dr. Daniels.
Present.
Okay, thank you. Agenda item 12, licensing committee report. I will turn it over to Dr. Daniels to take the lead here and provide an update. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So just kind of a brief summary, as Ms. Walker sort of mentioned some of the proposed regulatory changes for licensing. So there's about 8, and she mentioned about 3 or 4. So if there's more information needed on that, she can provide that. We do have one proposed motion for the day. At our last meeting, we did discuss the process for licensure through reciprocity. So we're beginning that conversation and dealing with the current requirements for the application process and seeing if we can, the idea came from the sunset review and how we can sort of streamline the reciprocity process. So we've started that conversation, and staff is working on conducting an environmental scan. So seeing what other state regulations are. We did a brief conversation about New York and Florida, kind of comparing and contrasting what the reciprocity is. And so we're in process of hopefully updating that and changing that to make it California more competitive, I guess, in a way, but, you know, drawing licensees here and making that process easier. Some people have licenses in 2 states and have to deal with 2 different CE regs, et cetera. So we're in process of discussing that. We're also discussing the renewal requirements for fees for inactive licensees. This came up during the fee proposal change, and the conversation started with as licensees retire is one way of looking at the inactive license. There were some stakeholders concerned with the financial ability to pay the yearly fee. And so we wanted to develop a survey to include the licensees in the conversation and being transparent about the board's fund and what that would look like, and asking them how they feel about keeping these people in our community. Would that mean that the active licensees pay a little bit more? What are the thoughts on that? And but during that conversation, some other information came up as far as how are people using an inactive license. And in the Business Professions Code, I think it's 700 to 704, the definition of inactive licensee is not participating in activities that require a license. So what's come up is questions as to performing an exam with a clinical impression would be needed. You would need to have an active license to do that. And so there's some questions around that. So staff is doing some investigating to clarify the language for an inactive licensee, what that scope is. As it currently stands, there's no CE requirements for an inactive license. The committee's concern is if I'm not doing continuing ed, I have an inactive license, but I am doing clinical exams and forming a clinical impression, there's question as to that's in violation of a license. So we're currently discussing that. And the background behind the survey for the committee was we really want to engage the licensees in this conversation, and we want to keep people who are truly sort of retired or an active part of the licensee committee. They have information to offer as far as teaching, that sort of thing. But we also want to be sensitive to financial constraints. So we're in the process of discussing that. We're also discussing, as Ms. Walker mentioned, Title 16, Section 330 to 331.16, and this includes the approval of chiropractic colleges, schools, and educational requirements, and then also 331.12.2 with the additional CCR of 331.12.3. And these issues are important for the licensing committee because we want, as everyone knows, our licensees, the numbers have been declining in years. And the current regulations for the curriculum and for approval of chiropractic colleges is through the Initiative Act. And it's quite outdated, antiquated, and overly prescriptive. So as Dr. Paris mentioned in his summary, we had a conversation with CCE and some of the other educational leaders as far as how do we move California to be more dynamic, more flexible, and more contemporary with curriculum and through a regulatory process. So they gave us some good ideas, which I think will be coming back from staff through the licensing committee of helping us sort of navigate how to change that, and offered their resources as far as helping us walk through that process. And the proposed motion for today came from the Sunset Bill. It's the Roth Bill SB 1434. And the staff has created regulatory proposal language for clarifying the filing of licensee's public address of record. And so staff has included it in our packet. And so for discussion for the board today is, are there any comments on the proposed regulatory language? It's attachment 2 under agenda item 12. And this is basically saying that we need an address of record and a telephone number, and then adding the email address as well. And it gives provisions for if they give a PO box, providing another address so that the board can contact them for managerial type issues, and also not including personal information. So does the board have any questions on the summary, and then also more specifically the proposed regulatory language to deal with the the Roth bill, the SB 1434?
Hearing none yet. I have a I was just wondering, can you give a sense of what did that look like, the reciprocity in other states? Like, how did we compare, and was
Yeah, so I did a search, and I feel bad for staff because if they're going to look at them all, it's quite a bit of work. So I think they have proposed coming back to the committee for summer. I looked at New York and I looked at Florida, and it's been a while since I looked at it. Florida had it very clearly laid out as far as they referred to CCE for accreditation for college if you fulfill that. They also had national boards, and then they broke it down into sort of years of practice. So if you have national boards, but if you were an older practicing chiropractor, then they had addressed each issue. I would have to look it up again. They were similar, but ours is more prescriptive as far as both of those states, I believe, sort of deferred to CCE as far as the requirements. And I think it was Florida, and I can't remember what year, but they repealed one of their prescriptive rights for reciprocity. And, like New York requires 36 hours of continuing ed for 3 years. California requires 24 per year. Both of them, you didn't have to have an attestation from the state like we do. And they didn't break it down specifically for the requirements like California does. Also, one of the things discussed in the licensing committee was, one of the statements is that you need to, the state has to be, share reciprocity with California, and the licensing committee sort of felt like, that doesn't really matter to California. We want to bring licensees to California. So that was a point of discussion as well.
Thank you. So most had the general acceptance of, graduate from a CCE approved
college, and then they included the link on some of them. So it was, I can't remember if it was New York or Florida. It's been a couple months since I looked at it, but they would include the link to CCE approved colleges. And it was pretty self-explanatory. And it, like I said, I think it was Florida broke it down. If you don't have national boards, here are your steps that you can do. And like I said, I think it was Florida that kind of took away some of their prescriptive rights. It might have been 1998, but I can't remember.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Quick question, or just asking for maybe some insight on your meeting that you had earlier this week. Are you finding that the CCE, when in your meeting, or maybe if you can't comment, we can discuss another time, but relative to moving towards this more of this competency-based education, David, we talked a little about that at the Cal Cairo event when you presented. But I'm just curious if there was any discussion or insight you got from your meeting on Monday about the movement in that direction.
Do you want me to comment, Dr. Paris, or
Sure.
do you want to?
Yeah.
Okay. My take on it was, that's where education is going in general across medicine and across nursing, and with the CCE, with chiropractic. So less in regards to sort of hours of butts in the seat, so to speak, but on this graded competency. And once you reach a level of competency, then you are entrusted to perform these activities, on the public, and you get your license. So in general, education, like I said, in the medical community is moving that direction, and it has been since about 2012. We discussed percentage, and Dr. Paris, you can maybe help me with that. We discussed percentages that we have in our regulations, and how do we move away from those percentages to more of a qualitative aspect in education. I mean, when you look at their guidelines, and they're continually improving them, and they'll be coming out in September with a new set of guidelines. And they added, as we discussed in several meetings ago, Metacompetency 8, which is really about diversity and public health, and so a new metacompetency, making more of a well-rounded doctor versus just being able to perform an adjustment or open a practice type of thing. So as they state, they are moving away from institutional type of regulation, and they're moving more through programmatic, and that is through the meta competencies, using different measuring sticks to ensure that the student, then doctor, can perform at a level that is not only good, but above good. And so they all availed themselves to sort of help California. I think they were excited to see California trying to move forward with the curriculum and licensing. Dr. Paris, do you want to add more to that?
Yeah, I would say that's a good synopsis. I think it is notable that the trend in education is to a lot of areas are moving to competency-based education, versus kind of a butts in seats for a certain number of hours. So, that essentially would allow students to demonstrate competency early on in their educational program and then actually advance them further than having like a very prescriptive time set, programmatically set time frame where everybody's, marching at the same pace. And it would also allow those who need more time to develop the competencies to develop those competencies. And so some of the colleges and that were educators that were on the call, this is clearly something that's pretty pervasive and widespread in education at this stage, and probably something that we can't ignore in that, it looks like it's if chiropractic education doesn't at least address this and look at this and see if there's an ability to move forward chiropractic education, we will be behind the curve in the healthcare fields and healthcare sciences. So
Yeah.
the interesting thing was that there was some leanings towards the ability of competency-based education and its ability to further diversity, equity, and inclusion. Um, because programmatically, one thing they find with competency-based education is it's a little bit easier to develop adult learners, and there's more of an ability to have flexibility in programs, and secondarily too, they think that potentially there might be some cost savings with developing programs through competency-based education where potentially the program, an individual might be in the program for a shorter period of time. They would meet the same competencies, but they were just able to arrive and achieve those competencies, sooner.
That's right.
So
Yeah,
yeah.
and so to leapfrog off of that, there's discussion as far as how it matters, in dealing, like when we had the discussion on Kaiser, 90% attendance versus 80% attendance, and there's a model that, the person can learn from home and then they come to the school for 3 weeks of intensive for their labs, that type of thing. And so you can really it's more about including sort of that work-life balance of being at home, being with family, allowing people to continue their education, sort of at home, but then going for these intensives, and that people learn differently at different times. And so even though the volume of information is going to be the same, that, if in school, people learn to adjust much faster than others. If we just take that for an example, so people can sort of accelerate, and they're finding that, the students are really liking it. And it's also, if it's $250,000 for a chiropractic education and it's 150 for a DO, PT, or something like that, then that's what Dr. Paris was sort of alluding to, that the way it is right now is we're not very competitive in the sense of attracting people to the profession. If it is, 4 years, your butt in the seat the entire time with the cost that it costs, given the fact that education is moving into a different direction, which it has been for a while, so it's not really new. And there was a little bit of discussion, it was very mild, about is there a gap between a licensee graduating and then going into practice? And there was some discussion about that. I mean, there's some in the literature that suggests that there is a gap. And so that is where a term came from as far as entrustable professional activities, is how do you take a licensee, whether it's medical or a chiropractor, as they graduate, and are they competent to perform these activities? Are we entrusting them to perform them without any supervision? So I think, Dr. Adams, you could sort of think of it as the clinic, right? You go to school and you sit and they talk about the adjustment per se, and then you're in class and you're supervised and you're practicing, and then through series of steps, you get into clinic and you're still supervised, but you're less supervised. It's almost sort of your own gig, but you're still supervised. That would be like level 4 in the EPA. And then level 5, which is we entrust you to go out into the public and perform this without any supervision. So that was some of the conversations that we had, but more specifically is how do we get California more in line so that we attract schools and licensees and for the state of California and the stakeholders, but also for the profession in general.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Ms. Cruz, did you want to add anything?
No, you are always incredibly thorough.
Did anybody have comments or edits to the agenda item 12, the attachment 2, as far as the language that staff has developed?
I have none.
If there's no comments or discussion, do you want me to make a motion and then open it for public comment, or the other way around?
Yes, we would have a motion in a second, then we'll open for public comment.
Okay.
I can make a motion. And my suggested motion is approve the proposed regulatory text for California Code of Regulations, CCR Title 16, Section 303 in Attachment 2 in the packet. Direct staff to submit the text to the Director of the Department of Consumer Affairs and the Business, Consumer Services, and Housing Agency for review. And if no adverse comments are received, authorize the Executive Director, the Executive Officer to take all steps necessary to initiate the rulemaking process, make any non-substantive or technical changes to the package, and set the matter for a hearing if requested. If no adverse comments are received during the 45-day comment period and no hearing is requested, authorize the executive officer to take all steps necessary to complete the rulemaking and adopt the proposed regulation for CCR Title 16, Section 303 as noticed.
Mouthful.
I'll second that. Mouthful.
Thank you. Don't have to repeat it. I think we can go to public comment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm opening up the question and answer panel. If anyone would like to comment, please type comment using the field in the lower right-hand corner of the screen, or you may simply raise your hand. We are displaying instructions. I do see we have a raised hand, so just a reminder, you'll have 3 minutes. I'll give you a 15-second warning. And our first comment is from Sergio Azzolino. Sergio, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Board members. Thank you for that update, Pam. So I just wanted to touch base on one aspect in regards to that, not to direct your vote at all whatsoever, but there is a little historical aspect that many of the board members may not be aware of. For those that are not aware, I was chair of the board for several years and served for 8 years. So about 10 years ago, we took up this issue of chiropractic education and requirements and whatnot. We, at that time, had all the presidents of the colleges attend the meeting, in-person meeting. We had the president of the ACA, the ICA. We had Craig Little representing the CCE. We had some people of experience that were stakeholders of practice 40 years. And whatnot. At that time, the issue, and I believe it's still going to hold true today, that was very limiting to all of us in regards to making education more contemporary. And I wholeheartedly agree with Dr. Daniels and Dr. Paris's recommendations on making education more contemporary in the profession and certainly making it more current and in line with with all the other healthcare specialties. But at that time, we were very much limited by the Chiropractic Act and the requirements of the Chiropractic Act. And, you know, this day and age, as we're flying to outer space regularly and going to the moon and going to Mars, here we are still governed by act that's regulating this profession. That's from 1922. And so we're over 100 years old here. And I would just encourage the board once again that we really need to look at opening up this act and allowing us to become more contemporary with all other healthcare specialties and all other educational institutions out there, because it is limiting us very specifically in regards to our requirements for education, how we deliver that education, whether it be remote, whether it be in person. And, you know, there's institutions from UCSF to Harvard Medical School to most institutions in the world, for that matter, that do allow much more contemporary methods of education. And these EPAs that Dr. Daniels was referring to are certainly the way to regulate and govern these competencies. So that's my 2 cents. I'm happy to answer any questions if anybody wants any history of what transpired then. But I encourage you all to keep doing the great work you're doing, and welcome Kristen to your new position. And just want to make sure that
15 seconds.
keep our eye on the target of we are going to age ourselves out by our own limitations, own regulations. So thank you.
All right, this is a moderator. I see no further requests for comment. Shall I close the question and answer panel?
Yes, please. And
Okay.
thank you, Dr. Azzolino, for coming on the call, and appreciate your insight and comments there. Thank you very much for taking the time today. Okay. Any further discussion on the seconded motion on the table? Hearing none, Mr. Sweet, would you please call the roll for the vote on the motion?
Yes. Dr. Paris,
Yes.
Dr. Adams,
Yes.
Mr. Sweet, yes. Ms. Cruz,
Yes.
Dr. Daniels.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Motion passes. Thank you, Dr. Daniels. Appreciate very thorough, very detailed update. Thank you much. Moving to agenda item 13. And I'm going to have Enforcement Committee report. Dr. Adams, can you please provide us with an update on the Enforcement Committee?
Yes, thank you for the opportunity, Chairman. Our Enforcement Committee met on March 2nd, 2023 via WebEx. We discussed at that time proposed changes to the board's disciplinary guidelines and model disciplinary orders and implementation of the uniform standards for substance abusing licensees. And that's California Code Regulations, Title 16, Section 384. During this meeting, the committee discussed the categorization and recommended penalties for violations of the statutes and regulations within the board's jurisdiction. And the committee also considered the need to categorize certain violations and to list the optimal terms of probation that correspond with specific violations within the guidelines to provide more clarity to administrative law judges when drafting proposed decisions. Based on the committee's feedback, staff is compiling a final regulatory proposal for the committee's consideration at a future meeting. We also addressed proposed changes to the record keeping and retention requirements for chiropractic patient records, Title 16, Section 318. The committee at that time continued its policy discussion regarding development of a regulatory proposal to update the board's record keeping requirements and address the retention of records in the event of the death, incapacity, or retirement of a licensee or upon closure or sale of a chiropractic practice. We also discussed regulatory proposal changes regarding the authorized activities performed by unlicensed individuals within a chiropractic practice. That's Title 16, Section 312. We continued good discussion on the policies regarding that pending regulatory proposal concerning the activities of the unlicensed individuals and what they're permitted or not permitted to perform within a chiropractic practice. So the committee reviewed research that the staff brought to us based on other states and their statutes and regulations and policies regarding chiropractic assistance, and provided feedback to staff on draft proposed language to amend Title 16, Section 312, and that's the supervision of unlicensed individuals. So our goal is to help clarify and to bring more current in relationship to the practice of chiropractic and unlicensed individuals in the practice of chiropractic, or within the practice of a chiropractor, what they can and can't do. So we're working through that process, and we're coming up with some good ideas. There's nothing for us to vote on right here, but I think we're addressing some things later in our meeting from items that we've proposed that may be voted on. With that, I'll leave it open to any questions.
Dr. Adams, I had a question, or just, I was hoping for just your thoughts or the committee's kind of thoughts and more background on the minimum training requirements for unlicensed individuals and what they can and can't perform. As far as, has there been issues with that? I mean, to me, it's clear in my head, but if it's coming up, there must be issues. So I was just hoping for a little bit more of what was discussed in the background behind that.
Well, some of the things that prompted it had to do with, what CAs do in the office, or chiropractic assistants as they're typically called, but also relationship to the preceptor and postceptor aspects, which are not really codified within our regs. So we need to get that clarified, and that's one of those issues that will come up, so that somebody can't get a postceptorship and kind of in perpetuity not get licensed but still practice chiropractic in those types of situations. So those are things that we're working on. As far as the CA and unlicensed individuals that aren't necessarily license eligible chiropractors that have gone through school, kind of those individuals that work in our practices that we may have assist us in certain ways but aren't necessarily specifically licensed as chiropractors. One of the things that we're wanting to entertain and looking into is creating some established certification for those aspects. So rather than you think of like a PA or a medical assistant that actually goes and gets an AA in medical assisting in a lot of these offices where doctors are, they've been trained specifically in a class where they've been tested on doing blood pressures and things like that. And we don't necessarily have that same type of thing. So we're looking at language that may surround that, and that might be something that might fall into your committee's purview as well when it comes to the license aspect, and those that are work within practices and what they have to have or don't have in order to perform certain procedures within the office. So we're getting that language clarified, getting that more clear.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, it was that Business and Professions Code 700, 701, 702, 703, as far as, inactives should not engage in any activity for which an active license or certificate is required. And so that falls into, someone could do range of motion, but it's the clinical impression or the interpretation that actually requires a license. Have there been complaints as far as not the preceptor, postceptor that definitely needs work, but have there been complaints with CAs overreaching as far as what they've been trained to do or not do that you're aware of?
Not that I'm aware of. I would defer to Ms. Walker to comment to answer that if she's aware of any specific things that prompted this. I think it was just more or less bringing our language up to date and being more current as opposed to any specific thing. But Ms. Walker, I'd defer to you if there is something that specifically prompted some of this.
Sure. So it's not driven by complaints on what's occurring or what's being performed by chiropractic assistants. I'd say that it's more driven by through this regulatory proposal, we're seeking to clarify the roles of like the supervising doctor within the office and then their subordinate staff. And as part of that clarification, we're diving into not only something that's being performed under direct supervision, but then we're talking about what they're doing under indirect supervision, and then talking about what those minimum requirements for demonstrating competency would be for someone that's not being directly supervised by the doctor. So the committee had discussed they really kind of started that portion of the discussion at the March 2nd meeting, but really exploring multiple pathways to where you could qualify, for kind of meeting the level of either training and or experience to where you can, you don't need to be right under the direct supervision of the doctor, but you could be performing, other services within the practice.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I would add, in regards to 318, the record keeping and retention requirements. I know of a situation locally, and I would imagine there's others, probably not the first time. The provider passed away, and there was some dispute over the sale and the practice. And there was a potential another licensee stepping in, but the practice was, got into the estate and the building and the sale, and the practice essentially closed. And so all the patients are stuck saying, how do I get my records? Who do I go to see? Who do I even contact? Right. So the active licensee was kind of blocked out of that practice, which was closed by the the estate, and he wasn't allowed to actively seek out those records and retain those patients, et cetera. So I think that issue I know is real, and I know that's something that happens from time to time, and we couldn't, and I think part of it is we really need to answer that question for ourselves. What should happen, and then the second thing was unlicensed individuals. And that was actually, at least a portion of that was in consideration. Also, we had a recent enforcement case where a patient had filed a complaint against the licensee, and only to go back to an office later and have that licensee, I don't recall the specifics, but I believe that licensee may have even been unlicensed at the time because of discipline, but was working in the office as a CA or et cetera, and was then interacting directly with that patient once again. And so that I'm sure you all recall that, but that was just within the last few board meetings. So I think I think some of that is drawn off some, kind of real life example situations.
Thank you. Mr. Sweet, the other member of our committee, do you have any comments for the rest of the board and for our public?
No, I don't have anything further. Thank you.
I have nothing else.
And thank you, Dr. Adams. Appreciate the update and the report. Hearing no further discussion or comment from the board, moderator, can we open agenda item 13 for public comment?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have opened up the question and answer panel. If any member of the public would like to comment, please type comment using the field in the lower right-hand corner of your screen, or you may simply raise your hand. We are displaying instructions and we'll give you a moment. And I do see a couple of hands raised already. So calling user number 6, you should see a prompt to unmute yourself. Go ahead and select that. Okay, we'll try that one more time. There you go. Calling user number 6, you're unmuted.
Hello, this is Falcon, student intern at Life Chiropractic College West. Thank you for the platform. A quick note, I was trying to make a note in the previous section for the licensing committee, but I was having a technical difficulty, but there's a note for this section. about who's allowed to do what, and it revolves around CPT code 99213 versus CPT code 99212 and 99211. The difference between 213, 212, and 211 is that 213 actually requires a doctor to execute the order. 212 and 211 are similar as far as the evaluation orders, but they can be carried out by staff without the consent of the doctor. So if there's a starting point, it might be to start at what is 99213 versus what is 99212 and versus 99211 and who could do what. There's a section of subluxation. This is now going back to the previous comment. The section of subluxation and finding that no subluxation is found is a doctor tier order that no other medical professional can do. So that would be a 99213. And how that pertains to the licensing committee is to introduce this concept or idea or fact to students has not been introduced. And as the CCE says that the chiropractic profession, as care is required to be delivered, has to comply with innate intelligence, state statutes, and federal law. So federal law and state statutes don't match to teach that to students. And I'm very excited for the licensing committee to speak about the rule edit for statute 331.12.2-E for the proposed amendment to include partial credit to teach this skill of the detection of subluxation and the possible finding with its data and measurements that no subluxation is found. As far as it opens up the untapped reservoir of insurance and public safety for partial credit in the college part. I think graduates know about it already, but no students know about
15
it.
seconds.
And that students should know about it. And I think if students know about it, it might open up the floodgates at the student level and increase enrollment at the student level. And regarding reciprocity for states, add Nebraska, Life West added Nebraska, second.
I'm sorry, the time was up. Our next request for comment is from Sergio Azolino. And Sergio, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Good afternoon again. Thank you all and Dr. Adams for your update on that. So regarding section 312, I would encourage the board to really look at an individual that has a revoked license as a separate category unto itself, because I don't believe they should be afforded any of the privileges that an unlicensed individual can. Unlicensed individual may be a physician, it may be a nurse, it may be a new graduate that could be functioning in practice. I've had plenty of physicians working in my office that were assisting with parts of the exam, and they are technically an unlicensed chiropractor. But certainly at a different skill level. So I believe the board should enact some sort of a regulation that if we have an individual with a revoked license, he or she should not be in a practice doing anything of that sort. So that's number one. Number two, I know there was some discussion in regards to the time necessary for a physician or a chiropractor to be observing or supervising indirectly individuals that may be presenting to a practice. I would say that that is an area that should have some investigation onto what constitutes a reexamination and become a little more contemporary. Just posing the question of, can a reexamination be conducted via Zoom? Can it be conducted via different range of motion measurements, different eye tracking measurements, different balance measurements? There are some objective things that unlicensed individuals may be able to perform that, once again, my understanding, licensed individual is the one that has the burden of making the interpretation. And I believe we should continue to uphold that the licensed individual has a responsibility and is the only person that can make the interpretation. So I don't think we need to punitively try to regulate an unlicensed individual anymore. I think the burden should just be on the licensed individual. They're making the final say. Furthermore, we explored this previously in the past. The act does not allow us to label anybody as a chiropractic assistant, and nor do we have any jurisdiction on anybody in an office besides the chiropractor. So I think our efforts need to be placed on simply regulating the chiropractor. And once again, if they're doing good work, as Dr. Daniels questioned, is there a question? Was there a complaint that arose? Because if the chiropractor is doing good work, then they should be able to direct their staff accordingly. And if they're not, and if something is taking place in an office that is not in patient's best
15
interest, then
seconds.
that licensee should be the one that's ultimately held responsible. And I don't think it's going to benefit us to try to label the unlicensed individual. Thank you.
All right, this is the moderator. I see no further requests for comment. Shall I close the question and answer panel?
Yes, please.
Okay, it's closed.
And thank you again to both public comment. Dr. Azzolino, thank you again for your time and attendance here today. Nice to have you back, even briefly.
Thank you. You're
Any
muted.
further discussion from the board member? I'm sorry.
Well, you were muted. We couldn't hear you, or maybe the video stalled. I don't know.
I think I froze. Okay. Any further discussion? Dr. Adams, any further comments? Anything else?
Oh, thanks for all your good work, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you for that update. Move to agenda item 14. Government and Public Affairs Committee report. And I will turn this over to Board Member Ms. Cruz to provide an update on the Government and Public Affairs Committee.
Thank you. And kind of as I'm leading into this, there's going to be a section where we're going to be kind of looking kind of for feedback and support. And a question I have for kind of Kristen or Sabina is, will a vote for each individual item be required to signal support? Or I just want to know kind of as I get there.
Yes, so we'll take each bill separately with the recommendation coming from the committee, and then they can have a discussion. They can make the motion to whatever they end up wanting to make the motion for: support, oppose unless amended, etc.
Okay. And I imagine unlike kind of the committee meeting, we are just going to be focusing on those three, correct?
Yes, what is here in front of us on the agenda
Sure.
as recommendations. Yeah,
Okay.
and then after each motion, second, we'll go to public comment on that motion, and then we'll come back and do our vote and then move to the next bill.
Okay. All right. So now we know kind of rules of engagement there. So we had our, I would say, last meeting, Governance and Public Affairs Committee meeting on March 13th. Kind of in this meeting, we had obviously the routine items where we were provided an overview of the budget, update on the Connect system efforts, a lot of things that we've already heard kind of in the executive officer report out. Kind of as it relates to, I would say, specific things in this meeting, in our in that particular committee meeting, we reviewed 22 individual items, kind of navigating its way through legislation. And so so there was kind of discussion around those topics. But the ones that we were specifically going to call out for today is 3 items that require or that are looking, or staff is looking for board support on. And so the first one here is AB 883 related to business licenses for U.S. Department of Defense. And this is around the Skill Bridge program. I believe we've talked about this in the past. And so this is related to kind of active duty members, where kind of as an opportunity for service members getting civilian work within so much time. called in the last 180 days of military service. And so the support needed for staff to further engage for additional, what's it called? Additional work on the bill in preparing the regulation package. Kind of that is, the ask is really around there. That should, and correct me if I'm wrong, Sabina, that's where the ask is. Can we move forward? And in moving forward, we were going to require kind of this amount of funding for to move it to the next step. Am I summarizing that okay?
I think I can jump in and offer just a little bit of a suggestion there. So for the bill, it was reviewed by the Government and Public Affairs Committee. Ms. Cruz summarized it quite well. It was presented to the committee with a recommendation from staff that we suggest that the board consider supporting the bill, just given that we've already have existing statutes that require that we expedite military applicants, veterans, that we grant expedited review for military spouses, and soon begin offering temporary licenses. So this is along that same line of just recognizing military members and expediting their applications accordingly. As far as the estimated fiscal impact that you see within the meeting materials, so for any of the bills that we analyze, we have to come up with a fiscal impact of what we estimate that it would cost. And then just due to the volume of legislation, the department really urges us to come up with a number, even if we determine that it's absorbable, because we used to be able to just say it's absorbable, but now they want us to specify a number. So the staff time that would be involved in implementing the bill is approximately $1,696. It's just based on our estimated time to update our application through regulation. Regardless of whether the board takes a position on the bill or not, if it passes, we would incur those costs to implement it. But here today is the committee agreed with staff and made a recommendation for the board to support. So then it's now before the board to consider taking a support position or any other position you may deem appropriate.
Thank you. So is there any kind of questions from the board before we go to motion?
So Ms. Walker, is the cost that you've projected, that's the fee of, or the cost of rewriting the application and then getting it approved through regulation? Am I hearing that correctly?
Correct. It's an estimate of our staff time that would be involved in having to develop a pretty simple regulation package to update our application form to ask the question if they're involved in the Skill Bridge program, so that we can then expedite the application. Those costs are very minimal. It's clearly absorbable within existing resources. We wouldn't need to hire additional staff. That's just, of their time to focus on that. That's what the cost would be.
Got it. Thank you.
I make a motion that we support AB 883 as recommended by the Governmental Affairs Committee.
I'll second.
Okay.
Lots of seconds.
All right. Let's put it out for public comment.
All right, I am opening up the question and answer panel. If any member of the public would like to comment, please raise your hand or type comment using the field in the lower right-hand corner of the screen. It is not necessary to do both, just one or the other. You may raise your hand or type comment in the field in the lower right-hand corner of the screen and send it to panelists. We'll give you a moment. All right, I see no requests for comment. Shall I close the question and answer panel?
Oh, yes, please.
Okay, it's closed.
All right, let's put it to a vote. Roll call, please.
Dr. Paris,
Yes.
Dr. Adams,
Yes.
Mr. Sweet, yes. Ms. Cruz,
Yes.
Dr. Daniels,
Yes.
So moved. On to the next item, or the next item, AB 996, specifically Department of Consumer Affairs Continuing Education Conflict of Interest Policy. So this this bill is around conflict of what is it? Our continuing education providers, whether it be the providers, the courses, for them to develop and maintain a conflict of interest policy. And it really is to kind of discouraging economic interest from the provider, whether it be the economic interest be in a specific commercial product, in a specific enterprise, and it kind of really is kind of focused there. And kind of similar information is provided on the fiscal impact. Is there any questions from the board on this topic? Or additional context for Ms. Walker?
I like it. I think it just supports what we've already been
Mhm.
doing. Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say the same. It seems in line with what is in our package.
All right, we can call for motion.
Public comment?
I'm sorry. Thank you. Public comment.
No problem.
Thank you. This is the moderator. I'm opening up the question and answer panel. If any member of the public would like to comment, please type comment using the field in the lower right-hand corner of the screen and submit it to all panelists, or simply raise your hand. We'll give you a moment. All right, I see no requests for comment. Shall I close the question and answer panel?
Oh, yes, please.
Okay, it's closed.
Let's go ahead and then kind of call for motion then.
I'll make a motion to support AB 996 as stated.
Second.
Oh, go ahead.
I'll second.
All right. And let's call for a vote.
Okay, if we're ready for the vote, then Dr. Paris,
Yes.
Dr. Adams,
Yes.
Mr. Sweet, yes. Ms. Cruz,
Yes.
Dr. Daniels,
Yes.
All right, so moved. Thank you, everyone. On to the third one. AB 1751, Gibson, opioid prescriptions, information, non-pharmacological treatment for pain. So what this is related to is requiring a prescriber to kind of take specific steps when addressing opioid prescription. And so whether it be kind of addressing all the different risks and dangers and just really availability of the non-pharmacological treatments out there. So this specifically including things like acupuncture, but as it relates to us, chiropractic care as well. So kind of in the documentation lists all the things related. And so it really builds into kind of the awareness and accessibility of non-pharmacological treatment options. So any additional context I'm missing, Ms. Walker?
I would just add that the bill was recently amended on April 13th to remove the requirement for the prescriber to offer the referral to a provider of non-pharmacological treatments for pain, such as acupuncture, chiropractic, physical therapy. However, the rest of the bill is there, so having to provide that informed consent process to the patient. So that was the recent change that was made on April 13th.
So I would say in our documentation, that second paragraph where it says the prescriber would be required to, one, obtain the patient consent as specified. What I'm hearing you say is that section 2, kind of offer as deemed appropriate a referral, that section has been removed?
Correct. Yeah, they still need to go through the process of informing patients about the availability of the non-pharmacological treatments for pain, but they wouldn't be required to make the referral if deemed appropriate. That portion of the bill was removed.
Does staff still have, given that change, is it staff's does their stance on supporting the bill remain the same?
It remains the same. Yeah, there's no change on the staff side. Unfortunately, it does weaken the bill a little bit, but it's still in line with chiropractic and with patient safety. So there's no changes as far as the staff input on that. Our recommendation or our idea still would be to support the bill.
And I would just add, my understanding is that the California Chiropractic Association was supportive of accepting the amendment.
Thank you.
I believe they might have somebody on, so maybe public comment, we can clarify that also. But
any more questions or comments from the board? All right, let's go to public comment.
Thank you. This is the moderator. I'm opening up the question and answer panel. If any member of the public would like to comment, please type comment using the field in the lower right-hand corner of your screen, or simply raise your hand. We'll give you a moment. All right, we have Don Benton wanting to make a comment. Don, you should be able to unmute yourself. There you go.
Hello?
We can hear you.
Oh, good. Okay. Sorry, I was just running from another room. Our bill is not going to move forward in 2023. We did not have enough support to get it out of Assembly Health last week. Or this week. Actually, it got moved to this week to try to get the support. We thought we had it, and then overnight we lost it. And so we've pulled the bill with the author for 2023. So we appreciate your support, but it's not going to do anything this year.
All right, I see no further requests for comment. Shall I close the question and answer panel?
Yes, please.
Okay.
And kind of thank you for kind of your comments, and thank you in participating and kind of helping provide additional context to us. So thank you for participating. So let's go ahead and kind of move into motion. Or actually, questions to Sabina, is a motion still required for this item?
Right, so if the bill is dead, like I'm hearing, you can withdraw your motion, and that way, because it would be kind of pointless to take a position on a bill that's dead.
Yes.
So if you would like, whoever made the motion is can withdraw the motion, and that's fine.
I believe a motion was not made yet, so is it more of just making a statement?
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought we went out to public comment because there was a motion. Sorry, too many of these are running together. Then no, nothing needed then, if there wasn't already a motion. Sorry about that.
Thank you. All right, then I think that calls it for my section.
My understanding, and I would request maybe we could open for public comment again. My understanding is that it simply went to a 2-year bill, and that we could still voice our support on this.
Yeah, if it's a 2-year bill, that's different. Unless it's if it's
Okay.
dead, then it's different. So let's definitely find that out.
Barring any objection, can we open up for public comment one more time, and perhaps Don Benton can get back on and clarify that for us?
All right. This is the moderator. I've reopened the question and answer panel, and people may use that to request comment or simply raise their hand. And I see Don Benton raising her hand again. So Don, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Hi, thank you. Yes, it is a 2-year bill. It won't move forward in 2023, but it's still alive for 2024.
Thank you for your comment.
Great. This is Sabina again. So yeah, absolutely. The board can still take a position. It will just be dormant until it's, moving again. But there's definitely no harm in taking your position now, even if the support letter just sits until the bill starts moving again.
And we have another comment. This is the moderator.
Well, can we make our motion and then open for public comments? We're not going back and forth.
Absolutely.
because I'd like to make a motion that we support AB 1751 as outlined by the in the agenda item and as proposed by the committee.
I'll second.
Let's go back out for public comment.
All right, this is the moderator. I'm reopening the question and answer panel. And then people may raise their hand or use the question and answer panel. And I see calling user number 7 with a hand raised. So calling user number 7, you should be able to unmute. Oh, there you go. You're unmuted.
Hello, Falcon here, student intern from LifeQuest. I got disconnected. Please pardon me, but I reconnected. About AB 765 and how it pertains to physicians and surgeons and medical specialty titles. I'm not sure what emphasis is aimed at here. However, I don't know if the AB 765 does bring into account differentiation among chiropractors and physical therapists. It is very clear that physical therapists who are not chiropractors will claim that they could adjust the body just as well as any chiropractor. Does AB 765
Excuse
actually
me.
differentiate?
Caller, we are not on the bill you're discussing. We're on bill number 1751. We haven't gotten to the bill you're discussing, so when we get to it, you might want to comment then.
Thank you, moderator.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, just to clarify to the caller, we're currently in agenda item 14, and AB 765 is contained within agenda item 15. So let's open it up for public comment on agenda item 14, and even more specifically, the motion on the table for AB 1751, please.
All right, this is the moderator, and I am not seeing any additional requests for comment. Shall I close the Q&A panel?
Yes, please.
Okay, it's closed.
All right, let's call this last one to a vote.
Dr. Paris,
Yes.
Dr. Adams,
Yes.
Mr. Sweet, yes. Ms. Cruz,
Yes.
Dr. Daniels.
Yes.
Right, so moved, and I believe that completes my section.
Appreciate the update, Ms. Cruz. Thank you very much. And thank you to the callers and Cal Cairo Executive Director Don Benton. Thank you for those clarifications. Appreciate that. It was helpful. Moving to agenda item 15. Review, discussion, and possible action on legislation related to the board, the chiropractic profession, DCA, and/or other DCA healing arts boards. And so I'm going to ask our Executive Officer, Ms. Walker, to present this agenda item, please.
Sure, thank you. So we have, let's see, before us, we've got 13 bills under this section. Some of them, most of them were discussed by the Government Public Affairs Committee at their meeting on March 13th. However, we've had some amendments since that time on a number of these bills. And you'll see within the meeting materials, for the most part, really, this is just an update item. The majority of the recommendations here from staff is just to watch the bills, but we just want to make the board aware. So beginning with the first one that we have Assembly Bill 477, Legislative Review of State Boards. This is really a spot bill relating to reports before the Sunset Review Committee. nothing to really share there or discuss. We're just continuing to monitor that bill. We placed it on the agenda in case it had some substantive amendments that would give us something to discuss here today. So unless there's any opposition, I'd like to just skip past that one.
No opposition from me.
Okay. The second bill that we have under agenda item 15B, AB 765 would physicians and surgeons, medical specialty titles. This is one of the more substantive bills for discussion today. It's currently been referred to the Assembly Committee on Appropriations. And with this bill, it's being known as the California Patient Protection, Safety, Disclosure, and Transparency Act, would make various legislative findings and declarations regarding the use of titles. And then it would also it would specify various medical specialty titles. And of course, hopefully no one can hear the background information outside my office. I apologize for that. But what this bill would do is specify various medical specialty titles and basically prohibit the use of those titles by anyone who's not licensed as a physician and surgeon in California. The bill was recently amended on April 12th, and I believe again on April 17th to carve out a few exemptions for a person that's holding a current and active license under another healing arts chapter, allowing them to use any term identified on their license, certificate, or registration. And it also wouldn't prohibit them from making any truthful statement that they specialize in a service or field that is within their license scope of practice and that does not contain any of the medical specialty titles specified above. And then the subsequent amendment after that carved out an exemption for the use of dental specialty titles. Really, as far as the staff review of this bill, while the bill itself does not have a direct fiscal impact on the board, it's not placing anything under the board's act, or in our statutes, but there are significant concerns from staff about a potential increase in referrals of complaints relating to licensees, what would now be considered lawful advertising of chiropractic specialties that would conflict with the provisions in this bill and would likely lead to an increase in complaints relating to the advertising of medical specialties. There are within the terms themselves that are identified as medical specialty titles. There's also a number of overlapping chiropractic specialties that generally will use similar terms with the qualifier chiropractic. So the concern there is if someone's using, a term such as chiropractic neurologist, is that going to then come to the board and we have to address it as a false advertising complaint because there's this bill that's basically taking hold of certain titles and claiming them, purely for the use of a physician and surgeon. So that's the concern from staff there. For purposes of putting the meeting materials together, we had initially kind of recommended watching the bill. It is potentially something that the board could consider offering some sort of amendment to the bill, to the author, just to, really carve out, chiropractic specialty titles or even other professions, just to kind of ensure that our licensees aren't inadvertently, being kind of subject to the provisions of this bill without, the corresponding public safety concern that goes along with it. So with that one, I'd really like to turn it over to the board for some discussion.
Does this, Ms. Walker, does this have the effect of essentially, if this bill were to pass as is, would that force us into developing regulation that then defines and clearly clarifies our licensees' abilities to do this language and to use, like, as a chiropractic orthopedist, say, or would we be prohibited by this bill from even developing our own language to clarify our ability to utilize those terms?
I would say that what we're facing is a conflict there that we likely resolve through regulation. The reason being, you're going to have an express statute under the Medical Practice Act prohibiting the use of the title. So even if we were to develop a regulation, my concern is that it would be in conflict with that law, because they're pretty specific and then also very broad. like within the bill itself, you see the language of use of any title, term, letters, words, abbreviations, description of services, and alone or in combination with another title. So it's a very broad-reaching bill, and I don't think it's something that we could carve out some sort of exemption to it through regulation. I think we would just be in a position of conflicting with current law if this passes.
Thank you for that. I also have I shared many concerns noted by staff, but I also have concerns that seemingly it restricts all other licensees to the language. Let me read the language. It says although they make it almost like it's an allowance from using any term identified on their license, certificate, or registration. And I mean, those are intentionally, very degree specific, right? And I think if they applied that language even to themselves, it would make potentially things difficult without all this extra language. So yeah, I have some major concerns, and I I'll let the other board members comment, but my initial thought here is that we take an oppose unless amended position. That's all.
I agree with Dr. Paris. I think we need to be more proactive with this bill versus just a watch. And I do have some comments or that I can share now, or I can do that later.
This
I
is
think
Sabina.
now's
If
the
I might.
time.
Oh, sorry. This is Sabina. I was just going to chime in here real quick that if you do start to entertain such a motion with an oppose unless amended or support, or if there is a amendment suggested, we'll have to have those amendments in the motion as well.
Okay.
Just to keep in mind during the discussion. So if you come up with some proposed amendments, it would be good to kind of keep track of those so that if however you might like to include them in your motion.
Thank you.
Well, I don't know if it's right now that simple. There's just so many issues with this bill if we start breaking it down as far as, part of the board's protection is for the welfare of the stakeholders. And so if this bill starts off in section B with saying that consumers can be confused or misled about the differences between the qualifications. However, it's this bill that will then confuse the stakeholders, as chiropractors already have established postdoctoral accredited educational realms in neurology, radiology, and orthopedic. So there's that issue. Then you move down into E and it says only licensed medical doctors or doctors of osteopathic medicine can use the title of physician. However, physician has a broader background than a doctor, and physician is already associated with a chiropractor. So if a stakeholder Googles chiropractic physician, what comes up is a doctor of chiropractic. And if you look at the 2020 practice analysis of the National Board of Chiropractic Examiners, they define what's defined as a chiropractor is a first contact portal of entry or a primary care physician. So by taking something that's already in the lexicon and already in the consciousness of the stakeholders, and then by stripping that title away, you are going to start confuse the stakeholders. If we move to just what Ms. Walker talked about claiming a title for one profession only. If you look at the etymology of the word neurologist, it means, to study the brain and the nervous system and the musculoskeletal system. And so that is in our definition of chiropractic. So we have so many issues with language and what's already being defined. And for a profession to take a word that's from Greek and Latin 17th century word that means one specific thing, to take that on as that it only belongs to their profession, I see that as problematic. Also, if you look at there was an opinion in JAMA just recently, and it was written by a medical doctor. And in 2019, there was only 12,000 general neurologists in the entire United States. And with an aging population, there's no way, if we just take neurology, for example, there's no way that many neurologists can serve the public or take care of the welfare of the public. And in that opinion, it was written in the context of there's so many now subspecialties in neurology that there is a declining number of general neurologists. So if we just take it as a broad spectrum, if we already have people reaching out to chiropractors who say have a TBI or a concussion or another neurological disorder, well, there's no drugs, there's no medication, and there's no surgery that is validated in the literature for that condition, if we just take that as an example. However, treatments with somatosensory, VOR, vestibular rehab, manipulation is in the literature for treating those conditions. So you run into the problem of a consumer having a problem and not being able to identify someone that perhaps could help them with their condition, because we're stuck in language that has been usurped by one profession, which is a profession that doesn't have the resources to even address that issue. So for me, this brings up a lot of concerns for the stakeholder, for their welfare, and really for their safety. There's also, I think that was all my comments. Those are my concerns. I don't know if I can wrap that up into a motion.
Well, I have to say that was beautifully articulated, Dr. Daniels. That it captures exactly my thoughts. That something that's so to usurp a word out of the entirety of the lexicon that and say it's yours is kind of it's just so arrogant on so many levels. But the confusion that will result from this, obviously, and then the complaints that could come to the staff because people don't understand the nuances behind this. This just goes back to the old infighting between medicine and chiropractic, and what they consider to be a competitor. I think it comes back to direct competition that they feel. But I definitely would not be supporting this bill as it stands. I think I do share a concern that there is some confusion out there that somebody that doesn't take a accredited and a highly credentialed postdoctorate degree, say in orthopedics or neurology, that might be something that we could support, that we clarify that it needs to, that there needs to be, an accredited, aspect behind the specialties that we have, just like medicine has to have their accreditation behind their specialties. So that would be an amendment if we could, that we could propose. That amendment would be, support with the clarification that those specialties, it's like neurology, radiology, orthopedics, pediatrics, that they can't, someone can't just take a weekend course and say, I'm a pediatric chiropractor, or I'm specializing in this, that there's more to it than that. But barring that, I think it's going to take a lot longer than we have discussion today, but I appreciate your articulation of that, because that's exactly how I felt. And you've done your due diligence on it. Thank you.
Just to kind of feed off what you were saying, the reason that we have, at least what we're seeing, is the reason we have people sort of taking weekend courses and saying that they're, a chiropractic neurologist, radiologist, or whatever, is because these stakeholders in the public, and if you take, professional athletes are seeking out a therapy that is validated in the literature and that can help them. And so, we do need to support the regulation of our it's 300 hours of postdoctoral education. You take an exam, you are licensed, you need to maintain that. And so you are qualified. We already have the qualification. We already have the accreditation. The, neurology, chiropractic neurology is, that board is accredited through the National Credential Agency. And so it is licensed, it is valid. And then, we just jump back to the name or the word physician, and we have a program that's called Certified Chiropractic Sports Physician. And these have already been established. They're in the language, they're in the lexicon already. So I just wanted to sort of add on to that of the importance of the maintaining the education, the licensing, and that there is more cropping up because the stakeholders are aging, we're getting more concussions, more injuries, and they need treatment.
I don't want to cut anyone else off. I have one further comment too. I think it's clear that for two comments. One, when you look at healthcare as a broad umbrella, and when you look at medicine, as for lack of a better term, but when you look at healthcare that way, really it's made up of all the specialties underneath. Each condition falls under some title. It's rheumatologic, it's orthopedic, it's neurologic. And those may define the patient population, geriatrics, or it may define the conditions, generally like rheumatology or the organ system affected, et cetera. So I think part of the big problem here is that this titling effectively covers healthcare, just broken down into individual titles, right? And so that really has the effect, the chilling effect of potentially limiting the scope of other providers in healthcare, because now they can no longer go seek specialization in these commonly accepted fields of healthcare. And I understand that generally in the community, I think more and more we're seeing the acceptance of other mid-level providers, other licensees, other doctoral professions that are engaging in healthcare and taking on these specialty areas. And I think that's because long ago, even medicine and the medical field realized that this specialization is in the interest of public protection. I mean, why else does a provider why does a physician refer to another physician with a specialty? Because it's in the best interest of the patient to have that specialization. It's in the best interest of the patient, and it's a humble. It's actually it's a quality that we want all providers to have. To realize there's somebody out there in this field who can diagnose, who can treat this issue better than I. Whether that's a dermatologic issue, whether that's having a radiologist read off the imaging, that's the purpose of these specialties. They're inherent to public protection. That's why they're there, to improve patient care. So it's really, to me, the big issue here revolves around that public protection and potentially having the chilling effect of removing that same public protection for other healthcare providers. Why would we not deserve, need, and require the same specialties within our own healthcare licensed profession? Why would we not also want providers in our profession to be specialists in orthopedic conditions, to be specialists in neurologic conditions? Of course we would. It's best for our patients. And so I think the negative downside effect that no one's really brought up yet as another point with this bill is that it has the effect of limiting that ability. It has the effect of reducing public safety by effectively putting an disincentivizing the public protection of having specialties within our own profession. So I think, for me, reflecting back on our mission, that has to be something that we discuss, and that has to be something that's understood. That why is this specialization there in the first place in the medical field? It's there because it's in the best interest of patients. Surely it's not there because of personal interests, or it's there because having people who specialize these is good for medicine. Well, it's also good for chiropractic care. And I can envision every other healthcare field. So to disincentivize that type of public safety and improve patient care, I think it really hurts licensees' ability to advertise and to be acknowledged that way. So that's all I have. I do have one more thing. Sorry. My suggestion, because of all the comments and the wide range of comments here, is that, and I think I suggested what my motion would be. I don't think I actually made the motion, but my motion would be that we if we can, direct this before we take a position, direct it back to staff to come up with, the language that would include, and that we can properly move this forward with the language that would include the amendments from the conversation that we just had and the comments we had here. Can we do that, Ms. Knight?
So you'd like to direct staff to basically go through the bill and come up with potential amendments reflected during our discussion today. Did I capture that correctly?
Yes, that's my suggestion.
Great. And bring it back to committee or full board meeting, whatever happens first, I'm guessing?
Yes, whichever
Perfect.
happens first.
Absolutely.
Can I ask, since I don't know the timeline of this, but this is, as Dr. Pear summarized, extremely concerning and important. And so I don't know the timeline as far as this moving along its process. Is this something that we need to meet sooner at a separate meeting, or?
I think you're meeting again in June, is that correct? Or
July.
Full board?
July.
Okay.
July.
Well, I think we can play by ear until then, and if we need to hold a special meeting, we can, because there also might be other bills that might come up, or any of these bills can be amended in such a way that we might want to bring back to the board if we get any kind of amendments that are really important to bring to you. So I think we can play it by ear, because we might have some other bills that might end up in that same position also. And then we can always hold another quick WebEx meeting.
Can I make that motion?
Absolutely.
Are we there? Okay. Just making sure we're there. Make sure there's no other comment discussion.
You're there whenever you want to make that motion.
Okay. I would make the motion that, as stated, that we return this to staff to develop language for the amendments around the discussion today in regards to AB 765 prior to taking our position.
I second.
Can we open this for a public comment? Oops.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've opened up the Q&A panel. If any member of the public would like to comment on AB Someone 65, please type comment using the field in the lower right-hand corner of the screen or simply raise your hand. And I see we have calling user number 7. You should be able to unmute yourself. There you go.
Hello, Falcon here, student intern from Northwest. About AB 765, the chiropractic profession's potential is a blessing and tremendous, and anyone who seeks to expand their skill in the healing arts should, and praises for that endeavor. The other way of looking at this also, though, is not so much like the potential of chiropractic, but people or other professions shortcutting chiropractic. So about the adjustment, well, here are the 3 questions. Like, so what is it? An adjustment? How is it performed? You know, art. Well, who does it? You'll find that, you know, like physical therapists can provide mobilizations and affect the body and manipulate the body and to provide the same results, just the same as a chiropractor. But that's a different who. That's actually a different who. And like there are different requirements to answer who. And for the physical therapist, significantly less requirements to be a physical therapist than a doctor of chiropractic. And in that capacity, like I would insist that AB 765 be monitored to not just, you know, test or limit what the potential of chiropractic is after chiropractic, like neurology or everything else, but everyone who's trying, or all other professions who won't go through the rigor of chiropractic education, but will do the things that chiropractors do underneath. And I think that'll it might take, or it might confuse the public, the consumer public, as to, like, if they want, you know, their body mobilized, they could just say, oh, I'll just go to my physical therapist because they do the same thing. It's a who that needs to be appreciated. Not so much a name, but, you know, just straight up like the chiropractor versus a physical therapist. And what we do isn't just body mobilizations, but there is a significant difference in how a physical therapist mobilizes or manipulates their consumers.
15 seconds. All right, our next comment is from Dawn Benton. Dawn, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Hi, it's Dawn Benton. I just wanted to share that Cal Chiro is strongly opposed to this legislation and has communicated that to the author.
All right, I see no further requests for comment. Shall I close the Q&A panel?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Thank you to all the callers. Thank you for your comments. Ms. Walker, can we continue on? Or, oh wait, I'm sorry.
We take a vote.
We need a vote. Mr. Sweet, can you please call the roll for the vote, for the motion?
Yes, Dr. Paris.
I'm a yes.
Dr. Adams.
Yes.
Mr. Sweet, yes. Ms. Cruz.
Yes.
And Dr. Daniels.
Yes.
Motion passes. Ms. Walker, do you want to continue on?
Sure. Some of these will be a lot faster. Some of them don't require as much discussion. So for item 15C, AB 795, unlawful sale of equipment, supplies, or services. This bill, so existing law, this bill is really just updating existing law within the Business and Professions Code to increase the penalty for basically the crime of selling equipment, supplies, or services to any person with knowledge that that equipment, supplies, or services will be used in performance of a service or contract that's in violation of the licensing requirements within the Business and Professions Code. It would raise the fine for that crime to not less than $2,000, but then it would also carve out an exemption for cash sales of, instead of $100, $200. This isn't a statute that we work with very often at the board or in our enforcement unit. We have no concerns if it were to pass the implementation. It's just really being brought to the board's attention just as a FYI that there's this legislation that potentially would affect the board and our enforcement unit.
I have no comments on this, but I'm wondering the remaining bills. Can we run through those and have a then have a motion for all of those bills at once if we agree they're all watch?
So you don't need to take a position to watch. That's part of just staff duties on related bills. You only need to take a motion if you're going to either support or oppose, if amended. So I can either run through them, or we could just, if there was ones that there's questions, I could field questions in the interest of time. I'm open to either.
Okay, yeah, let's run through them, field questions, and then we'll go public comment on the remaining bills at the end after we run through them all.
Okay, sure.
Okay.
So the bill after that is AB 796. This bill has to do with the introduction of legislation to enact the Athletic Training Practice Act and establish an athletic trainer licensing committee within the Board of Occupational Therapy to exercise licensing, regulatory, and disciplinary functions for athletic trainers. This bill also would define the practice of athletic training, specify various requirements, establish title protections for the title athletic trainer or licensed athletic trainer. And then it would also mandate that these athletic trainers would have to practice only under the supervision of a physician and surgeon. This bill has no fiscal impact on the board. It's provided as just for general knowledge for the board of the potential for a new committee under the Department of Consumer Affairs. So I'd entertain any questions on that.
I have one quick question. Do we have any insight as to why it was placed within the California Board of Occupational Therapy? Seems like there might have been a better place. That's all. Or more appropriate place.
We do not. That was something that was pointed out in the analysis, that it may make more sense to go under the Medical Board of California, given that that's who would be supervising the athletic trainers. The bill originated as establishing the Athletic Trainer Licensing Board, and then it was amended into a committee placed under occupational therapy, and then we're continuing to monitor. But potentially, if this was to even move forward, there's been prior legislation attempting to regulate athletic trainers. There is the potential for further amendments that may potentially place it under the medical board.
Thank you.
Not hearing any other questions, so I'm going to go ahead and just continue on. The bill after that is AB 814, has to do with animal physical rehabilitation. And really, this bill is unique in that what it would do is it would authorize a licensed physical therapist to be registered with the Veterinary Medical Board as an authorized animal physical therapist, and to provide animal physical rehabilitation if specified requirements are met. So really what's unique on this bill, and it's not something that we see all that often, is how it's actually intersecting the two different boards. So you have licensees from the Physical Therapy Board actually registering with the Veterinary Medical Board, and then establishing authority for the Veterinary Medical Board to actually discipline a physical therapist. So the crossing over is kind of interest. There's also with animal physical rehabilitation, there are, the other reason why we've put that here for consideration is we do know, there's animal chiropractic. I don't know if animal physical rehabilitation is something that chiropractors ever practice, but just wanted to bring that to the board's attention as well.
I have no questions. Thank you.
Okay, continuing on, the next bill is AB 1028, the reporting of crimes, mandated reporters. We've seen this bill before. We saw this during the last legislative session, but it didn't move forward. What this bill would do is remove the mandated reporter requirement for a health practitioner to report to law enforcement when they suspect a patient has suffered physical injury caused by assaultive or abusive conduct, and instead require that health professional to provide some brief counseling, education, or other support to the patient, and then offer a warm handoff or referral to local or national domestic violence or sexual violence advocacy services before the end of the patient visit. So this bill is back again, really according to author. The approach there is to really create access to healthcare services by creating a survivor-centered, trauma-informed approach and limit basically non-consensual contacts with law enforcement on the patient's behalf. So that's really what's behind the bill. It's back again this year. It didn't move forward last year, but I don't know if the board has any additional thoughts or questions on that.
I just had a kind of question or concern as far as the health practitioner to provide brief counseling, education, or other support. I think there's some people that would feel that that's not, we don't have education in that as far as counseling. And so it looks like it's written pretty vaguely. I'm just wondering more with like a little more information around that and what's considered a warm handoff. I guess thinking of the licensees, if that, comes into play and someone comes into their office and they're not equipped to do brief counseling, what does that look like?
So it's not defined within the bill, and I would say that's an opportunity for, if the bill were to pass, the board could put some resources out to licensees to help guide them in those circumstances. I would say naturally the place to start would be with those advocacy services that may have some recommendations on really how to approach the situation and kind of ease from that clinic encounter into making the referral. That's kind of just making that warm handoff happen. So that's something that we would definitely need to be providing guidance to the licensees. It's not something that's within our act that we would necessarily, create regulations on, but certainly it fits within our broader need for further outreach and kind of guidance to licensees on our website.
Thank you.
Question there is, how do I say this? In terms of guidance that we would provide, is there what's called opportunity to reach across to kind of other state agencies that would like CalHope or something like that for any kind of directory they may have, right? Because I understand kind of for them encouraging folks to go to kind of local opportunities, but I imagine even at the state level there is kind of go-to resources kind of at a bare minimum, I imagine.
Yes, there are, and if this bill does proceed forward and is likely to pass, that's something that we would definitely need to be engaging with, not only with our board but also reaching out with DCA to kind of take a broader approach, because this affects not just chiropractors but all the healing arts profession as well.
I'm just a comment. I'm frankly shocked. I think that when domestic violence is, when we look at the statistics, it tends to be one of the most violent situations that police officers respond to, and to kind of encourage healthcare providers to seemingly, even I understand it's counseling, education, other support, but I mean without when you identify somebody's being abused, and know that they're being harmed, to not turn that in and let the law enforcement agencies figure that out. I mean, also as kind of a protection mechanism for everybody that might be involved, including the provider. I think it's a little bit scary to think that we're not referring these over to law enforcement, especially I believe the previous um, they were always like if you make a report in good faith, you weren't criminally or civilly liable previously, were you? I didn't think so. So yeah, I'm a little bit shocked in that's still not going to be required. We'll watch closely.
Okay, let's see here. Moving to the next bill, this is purely just a update on potentially another establishment of another board within the department. That's AB 1055 relating to alcohol drug counselors. What this bill would do is basically establish the Allied Behavioral Health Board within DCA for the licensure, regulation, and discipline of alcohol drug counselors. In addition, it would create a title protection for the title licensed alcohol drug counselor by any person who's not licensed by the board. No fiscal impact on the board. It's just an update on potentially another board joining the department. The bill after that is AB 1707. That's relating to health professionals and facilities adverse actions based on another state's law. What this bill would do is would prohibit a DCA healing arts board such as BCE from denying an application for licensure or suspending, revoking, or otherwise imposing discipline upon a licensee on the basis of a civil judgment, criminal conviction, or disciplinary action in another state if that judgment, conviction, or disciplinary action is based solely on the application of another state's law that interferes with a person's right to receive sensitive services that would be lawful if provided in this state. This is a bill just generally with what's going on in healthcare nationally. It's attempting to kind of counter that to ensure that the various licensing boards aren't disciplining licensees for conduct that, had it occurred within this state, wouldn't have been a violation of California law. As far as the staff perspective on this, we don't anticipate receiving many of, if any, complaints in this area. Generally, most of the services would be something that's largely outside of chiropractic. And then we also noted that when we do, even under existing law, when we take disciplinary action or when we pursue disciplinary action based on something that occurred in another state, we do evaluate the underlying circumstances and what the conduct was. We don't just take a criminal conviction or some sort of disciplinary action at face value and take action based on that. We always delve into the underlying circumstances. So really, there's no concerns from staff with this bill or complying with it if it were to pass. The bill after that, we have Senate Bill 259, reports submitted to legislative committees. This bill's so far pretty simple, just requiring that a state agency post on its website any report that it submits to a committee of the legislature. No concerns there. We post that sort of information on our website. We also have SB 279 relating to administrative regulations, public participation, and the comment process. The reason we put this bill on the agenda is what this bill has two parts, but really the part that's pertinent to the board is the potential requirement for a state agency to provide a minimum 21-day public comment period for purposes of determining whether the proposed adoption, amendment, or repeal of a regulation would meet the definition of a major regulation that requires a pretty complex regulatory impact analysis. So really just providing that as an update to the board. If this were to pass, it's going to have some impacts on the regulation process by the introduction of another public comment period, simply for purposes of determining whether the board's regulation is considered a major regulation, which we never hit that level of fiscal impact for it to be considered a major regulation. We also have SB 372, which is related to the Department of Consumer Affairs and licensee and registrant records name and gender changes. What this bill would do would would be basically require the boards within DCA to update a licensee or registrant's records, including the records contained on our online license verification system, to include their updated legal name or gender if the board receives government issue documentation as described from the licensee or registrant demonstrating that their legal name or gender has been changed. It would also require that we remove any prior name or gender information from the online license information system, treat the information as confidential, and establish a process for providing that information upon receipt of a request. The bill was recently amended so that it's not upon receipt of a request that is related to a complaint, but rather for an enforcement action. So the bill through the amendment has provided a little bit of greater clarity to us of the intent of when we would release that information. So as a result, we actually estimate that our fiscal impact would actually be lower because it likely wouldn't require that we develop regulations to establish that process and define what it means when we're releasing the information, because the amendment to the bill makes it much more clear the circumstances of which we would release that information. So with that bill, it's something that would definitely impact the board's operations. We would be taking guidance from the Department of Consumer Affairs on how to handle those circumstances, and then also working with the OIS department to ensure that our online license information is complying with the bill. But there's no concerns from staff there.
This is Sabina, if I can chime in real quick. I do know some other boards have opposed this bill, and there's a lot of still unclear areas in this bill that have some concern. One of them is also the National Practitioner Database, and when boards report discipline to that, how is that going to be, how is that going to continue to be linked? So if you have a person who, for example, changes a name but has discipline, has been already reported to the National Practitioner Database, then what happens there? Because we can't control what the National Practitioner Database has and how they link their records. Also, it doesn't really include things like, for example, how does a person who has ceased seeing a practitioner then try to obtain their records later if they don't have the person's contact information, and then they changed a name and they can't get that contact information, or they don't have a name, patient records, or what if time goes by and then they realize, wait a minute, that was inappropriate conduct by my licensee, but they've now changed a name and they can't do a PRA request to locate that information. So there's a few more concerns. Psychology did oppose the bill. It was in their last meeting, which is also, I'm assuming, recorded and webcasted, though I haven't had a chance to watch it yet. And then BBS will be looking at this in May as well.
I see a staff recommendation for support.
No, I was just double checking my materials there. Our staff recommendation is to watch, and thank you, Sabina, for providing that information. What I would suggest is, in light of the fact that we're bringing AB 765 back to the board for consideration, I would suggest that maybe we bring additional information and concerns on SB 372 back to the board for discussion at the same time.
Absolutely. And by then we will also probably have some opposed letters or oppose unless amended. And so we'll have additional information from other boards and see what specific concerns they have. I'm always a fan of not recreating the wheel, and we'll kind of see where the other boards are leaning also, and more eyes the better, right?
Okay, and then moving to the next bill, SB 544. This is the one with the staff recommendation to support. So what SB 544 would do is update the Bagley-Keene Open Meeting Act relating to teleconferencing meeting requirements. Really, in a sense, what it would do is what it would allow is for boards to currently we're under this extension of, or kind of suspension of the Bagley-Keene Open Meeting Act, where we're meeting like we're meeting today, and we've put forward an agenda with no physical locations on it. The only way to join the meeting is by going on WebEx or calling in to the call-in number, but there's no physical location. Generally, under the Bagley-Keene Open Meeting Act, if we were to conduct this sort of teleconference meeting, and we've done a few in the past, so you may recall, we have to agendize the location of each and every board member, and the board member has to be present at that location. Location has to be open and available to the public. And if we've got 5 or 6 meeting locations noticed, and for some reason one of the board members can't attend, we then have to cancel the meeting because we lose our physical public location. So what this bill does is it really solves, I would say it solves a lot of those challenges with teleconferencing meetings, but still does it in a way that kind of balances the current law versus some proposed changes. So really, in a sense, the most substantive change within that bill would be to allow for teleconferencing meeting locations. You don't need to agendize each and every location on the agenda, but you would have to provide at least one physical public meeting location where members of the public can go to observe and attend the meeting, in addition to providing them with access to your means of either teleconferencing or WebEx. The other benefit to the way the bill is structured is that physical meeting location has to have either a member of the body or staff. So under current law, we have to, for the physical meeting locations, there has to be a member of the state body. What this bill would allow us to do is to set up a remote WebEx meeting like we have today, with the only change being that we have to open up a public meeting location with at least board staff present so that members of the public can go there. So really this bill, it's something that staff really is supportive of. We really see how this bill provides the same access that we have, increased public engagement with our meetings, and then also would allow us some cost savings when we go if we conduct 2 of our 4 physical meetings virtually, like we're doing today, with just the one physical location at, say, the board office or one of the Department of Consumer Affairs meeting spaces that doesn't incur any additional costs. So for that reason, we're estimating that through the use of this bill, we could potentially save up to about $10,000 a year annually, just on travel related meeting expenses. And then really, that's where the staff recommendation is on it, is to support.
Any discussion from the board members? Any comments? Apologize, previously my eyes like jumped ahead to this, lasered in on support.
This is something that I'm certainly in favor of, so I have no problem supporting it. If we're taking a support position, does that mean we have to make a motion?
Correct.
Any other comment, discussion from the board members?
I make a motion that we support SB 544 as presented by staff and take a support position.
Sorry, I'll second that.
Thank you. Moderator, can we open agenda item 15L for public comment?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've opened up the question and answer panel. If any member of the public would like to make a comment, please type comment using the field in the lower right-hand corner of the screen and submit it to all panelists, or simply raise your hand. We are displaying instructions and we'll give you a moment. All right, I see no requests for comment. Shall I close the question and answer panel?
Yes, please.
Okay, it's closed.
Mr. Sweet, would you please call the roll for the vote?
Yes, Dr. Paris,
Yes.
Dr. Adams,
Yes.
Mr. Sweet, yes, Ms. Cruz,
Yes.
and Dr. Daniels.
Yes.
Motion passes. We support it. Thank you. I think there's one left.
Yep, there's one bill left. It's SB 802. What the bill on its face is would update existing law to require a DCA board to notify an applicant in writing within 30 days after a decision is made to deny their application for licensure. According to the committee staff, this is actually a placeholder bill. It's originated in the Senate. It's in the Assembly. We're closely watching it to see what it could become or be amended to. The existing bill as it's written today really has no impact on the board other than it's somewhat vague as far as the 30 days after a decision is made. What does that mean? But we're just closely watching that bill. Nothing for the board to take action on at this time.
Thank you. Any further discussion on any of the bills presented from the committee, from the board? Hearing none. Moderator, can we open full agenda item 15? I'm sorry.
I think we need to make a motion at the end here to take a position of watch, or is
No,
that
we don't need a motion for the watch positions.
okay? We just have to public comment. Sorry, my bad.
That's okay. That's what I thought too. Oh, we did. Okay, moderator, can we open agenda item 15 for any further public comment?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've opened up the question and answer panel. If any member of the public would like to comment, please type comment using the field in the lower right-hand corner of the screen, or simply raise your hand. We are displaying instructions and we'll give you a moment. All right, I see no further requests for comment. Shall I close the question and answer panel?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Thank you. And I have the time as 3:10, and I'm going to request that we take a quick 5-minute bio break and come back at 3:15, and we'll continue on with agenda item 16. Moving on to agenda item 16. And review, discussion, possible action on regulatory proposal regarding disciplinary decisions involving sexual contact with the patient and required actions against registered sex offenders. And I will have Ms. Walker present this agenda item for us.
Sure, thank you. So this agenda item is a continuation from the discussion at the January 20th, 2023 board meeting, as well as the last two enforcement committee meetings of 2022. This regulatory proposal originated as part of the proposed Consumer Protection Enforcement Initiative CPEI regulation package. And then it was split into smaller pieces so that we could take each of the policy issues and have them discussed by the committee, ultimately the board. And what that resulted in is at the January 20th, 2023 meeting, the board agreed with the enforcement committee's assessment of the matter and then directed staff that we prepare proposed language that was in line with the committee's recommendation that that proposed language would basically require that any proposed decision by an administrative law judge that contained a finding of fact that the licensee engaged in any act of sexual contact as defined in Business and Professions Code Section 729, Subdivision C, or is subject to registration as a sex offender under Penal Code Section 290 in any tier, to contain an order of revocation and prohibit that a proposed decision from containing any stay of that revocation. It would also require that any board decision involving a finding of fact that a licensee engaged in any act of sexual contact to contain an order of revocation. However, unlike the administrative law judge requirement, the board would have discretion to issue a stay in the matter. And then also considering language that would require the board to either deny or revoke a license for any applicant, licensee, or petitioner who's subject to registration as a sex offender in any tier. And then prohibit the board from issuing any stay of that revocation for an individual who's subject to registration in the higher tiers of Tier 2 or Tier 3 as defined in statute. So what we did following the board meeting was we developed language that reflected that intent as directed by the board. That can be found in the materials as the attachment to agenda item 16. For purposes of today's meeting, we're asking that the board review and discuss that text. And if approved, there is a suggested motion within the meeting materials. And then also wanted to note that within our public comment submissions that we got for today's meeting, there was a comment from Roger Carlton about this matter and weighing in on an opinion, urging the board to, rather than mandate, consider placing it in the disciplinary guidelines. So just wanted to bring that to the board's attention and then return it to the board for discussion.
Okay, thank you. Let me open this up to any comments, discussion from the board members.
Yeah, Ms. Walker, actually, my question is related to the public comment in relation to the language. I was just wondering if you could clarify them together for me. The public comment makes it seem like that under the proposed regulation, a single finding of sexual contact with just one patient, that the terminology is vague. And so I was just wondering what the committee or the thoughts are on the public comment in relation to the language that we have.
Sure. So I just wanted to start out by confirming. So with the language that's there, it's very it's modeled after the majority of the other healing arts boards within DCA. They have similar provisions. The whole idea of CPEI regulations were quite a bit behind the curve on it. Most of the other boards have already adopted into language or into regulation requirements that if an administrative law judge issues a proposed decision involving any act of sexual contact with a patient as defined in the statute, that order must contain revocation. So that's what this is. This language would do the same. The only exception would be it'd be requiring that the administrative law judge issue the order of revocation. The board would still have discretion to place the person on probation, but that same discretion wouldn't extend to the administrative law judge in their drafting of a decision. There are valid points brought up in the written public comment for consideration. The only thing that I would kind of add to that comment is that yes, under this regulation, if there's a single finding, this would apply. However, you still have to make the case that it was sexual contact for that purpose. So not just inappropriate touching, but you would have to prove the sexual intent of the case. So that's something that often, I think is somewhat overlooked in the written public comment. It just assumes that if there's the touching, that this would apply. We have to prove that sexual intent for this to be effective.
Thank you.
And a question for me is, so in addition to that part, there's also kind of is if they are also if there's I'm thinking in like coding terms, but and an or versus or, it's an or if they're registered as a sex offender, correct? So it's one scenario or the other scenario, both, right? Not necessarily both is what I'm also hearing. So that's
correct. Yeah, there's the two different sections. So the 384.1 addresses findings involving sexual contact with a patient. And then that would require an administrative law judge to issue an order of revocation. It would also require the board to issue, the same, but they couldn't stay that. They could stay that decision, or they can stay the decision. Whereas section 384.2, that's only a separate section. It's kind of in line with the same proposal, but that has to do with registered sex offenders.
Yeah.
So in any tier, they can't be licensed by an administrative law judge. They would have to either deny the application or issue an order of revocation in their proposed decision. And then as far as the board's concerned, the board would have discretion in dealing with a level 1 offender, which is the lowest tier, and the board could decide to, place the licensee on probation and stay a revocation.
Yeah, and the reason I asked is because I know even kind of within that level one tier is kind of the indecent exposure. Someone, kind of someone has a couple drinks, they go out behind the bar type of situation, and now you're on a list. So kind of want to acknowledge kind of what things fall within the different tiers, but then also for those who wish and want to justify their path forward, what is that? But at the same time, kind of putting protections in place for patients. So thank you for that clarification.
So just for my own jogging my memory as I read over this, in the scenario that we're talking about in the first one, where the ALJ does not have discretion in a finding of fact of sexual contact, automatic revocation in his order. Now, if there's an automatic revocation, where do we come in as a board where we have discretion that you're saying the board has discretion? Is that when a person files to reinstate or to circumvent the ALJ? I mean, I'm trying to understand that real quick, because if we have some discretion, when does that happen?
Sure, and that's a great question. As far as the administrative law judge, I want to emphasize that what they issue to the board is a proposed decision. So it comes to the board in two manners. There's when if we negotiate a stipulated settlement, there could be a negotiation of basically an order placing the licensee on probation, and it would go to the board for approval. Or you could have a matter where, and I will say that cases that go to hearing, unless for some reason we can't settle, they're usually egregious enough that we are seeking the revocation order, particularly sexual misconduct cases that aren't settled. But if it were to go to a hearing and the judge found evidence that, or had a finding of fact that had occurred, they would be then mandated to issue an order of revocation, but that proposed decision would go to the board for the ultimate approval. So if within that hearing context, there was all sorts of extenuating circumstances outlined within that, the board would has the final say and could reduce the administrative law judge's proposed decision. They wouldn't have to adopt the revocation. You could place them on probation at that point.
So is it fair to say that the public comment is perhaps confusing our discretion and our power here, that we still do, in cases of sexual contact finding of fact, we still do have discretion to hear the facts and review that before a final decision is made? Is that correct? That was my impression when we first did this in the first place. And then when it came to the tier 2, 3, those were automatic. Tier 1, we wanted discretion as well.
That's correct. So looking first at section 384.1 relating to the finding of sexual contact, the board has discretion, but with the language as drafted, the board would have to, at a minimum, place the licensee on probation by issuing a revocation order, staying that order and placing them on probation. There are other boards that have, rather than really addressing what the board has to do in that circumstance, they have regulations that just simply state that notwithstanding their disciplinary guidelines, any proposed decision issued by an administrative law judge shall contain the order of revocation, and they don't wade into what the board needs to do by establishing that minimum of basically revocation, stayed, probation. So that's the only difference there. But the board would have discretion. You just wouldn't have discretion to say issue a public approval. You would have to, at a minimum, revoke the license, stay that revocation, and place a person on probation. That's the same approach being taken in 384.2. So the board would have no discretion on a level 2 or a tier 2 or a tier 3 sex offender. They would have to either be denied or revoked. With a tier 1 sex offender, which is the lowest level, the board could issue the same thing. The board would could issue a license and immediately revoke it and place it on probation. Or if it's an existing licensee, revoke the license, stay that decision, and then place them on probation. But so really what it's establishing is mandating that an administrative law judge order revocation and mandating that the board, at a minimum, place the person on probation.
And these, again, this is when there is a finding of fact by the ALJ, right? This is, not necessarily admittance, but that the ALJ has found that there's sufficient evidence and the person maybe hasn't stipulated or negotiated, and then it went to trial, correct? And so now it's coming to us to make a decision.
Correct. Yes.
Okay. All right. I'm clear now. Got it. That's what I thought it was. And then when I read this public comment, I thought, well, did I misunderstand this? So I'm much clearer now and fully comfortable with what we've done, the work we've done. And thank you for that clarification.
Yeah, thank you also. That was helpful. Okay. Is there any further discussion, comments, questions from the board members? Is there a motion? Oh, mute.
Dr. Adams, I think was.
Sorry about that.
There you go. Go ahead.
Talking to myself. Yes, I suggest a motion is to approve the proposed regulatory text for California Code of Regulations, CCR Title 16, Sections 384.1 and 384.2 in the attachment. Direct staff to submit the text to the Director of the Department of Consumer Affairs and the Business, Consumer Services, and Housing Agency for review. And if no adverse comments are received, authorize the executive officer to take all steps necessary to initiate the rulemaking process, making any non-substantive, substantive, or technical changes to the package as set the matter for a hearing if requested. If no adverse comments are received during the 45-day comment period and no hearing is requested, authorize the executive officer to take all steps necessary to complete the rulemaking and adopt the proposed regulation for CCR Title 16, Sections 381.4 and 384.2 as noticed.
Can you just
repeat that?
thing? No, just the last line. I think you got the numbers out of order there.
Out of order?
Yeah, I think you said
take all steps
380.
necessary to complete the rulemaking and adopt the proposed regulation, CCR Title 16, Section 384.1 and 384.2 as noticed.
Perfect. Thank you. Is there a second?
A second.
Thank you, Ms. Cruz. Moderator, can we open this agenda item and motion for public comment, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've opened up the question and answer panel. If any member of the public would like to comment, please type comment using the field in the lower right-hand corner of the screen or simply raise your hand. We are displaying instructions and we'll give you a moment. All right, I see no requests for comment. Shall I close the Q&A panel?
Yes, please.
Okay, it's closed.
Thank you. Okay, is there any further comment, discussion from the board? Hearing none. Mr. Sweet, will you please call the roll for the vote on the motion?
Dr. Paris,
Yes.
Dr. Adams,
Yes.
Mr. Sweet is yes. Ms. Cruz,
Yeah.
Dr. Daniels,
Yes.
Thank you very much. Motion passes. Moving to agenda item 17. Get caught up here. Give me 1 second. Okay. Well, this is a big one. It's nice to be on agenda item 17. This has been on the board's agenda for a long time in committee and to the board and back and forth. So agenda item 17, review, discussion, and possible action on regulatory proposal regarding annual continuing education requirements for licensees and the board's CE course review and approval process. And I will turn this over to Ms. Walker to present this agenda item.
Sure, thank you. So as the board's aware, and likely a lot of our public participants are aware, the board's been working on updates to the continuing education regulations for quite some time. We've made some tremendous progress over the past, I would say, six months, a little bit longer, on really moving these ideas forward. At the January 20th, 23 board meeting, the board really reviewed draft text that had gone through the Continuing Education Committee and directed staff to really put that text through the formal legal review so that we can come up with proposed text that could move forward. We've done that, and it's within the attachment to agenda item 17. We didn't make too many major changes to it. I would say of the most substantive that since the last time you've seen it is the addition of a new section 360.1, where we're defining the various submission methods for continuing education applications, forms, and payments, and outlining the conditions for electronic submission of those applications. Also within the text itself, we did have to make some further, we had to define things such as the process for the informal hearing before the executive officer, how that gets scheduled, and how that notice of hearing is transmitted to the provider or the applicant. Beyond that, it was just some technical cleanup changes since the last time you've seen this language. What we're seeking today is potentially a motion from the board to move forward with this language and initiate the rulemaking process. Keeping in mind that as part of that process in the development of our regulation, staff will be doing the more formal fiscal analysis. And if that fiscal analysis reveals, any potential changes that need to be made to the fee amounts that are separate from what's within statute, we can bring that back to the board, and we can always issue some modified text with those updated fee amounts. So really, with today's discussion, staff is seeking the board's input and potentially approval of the proposed text, and including the forms that are incorporated by reference, which are in your meeting materials, and seeking a motion to direct us to initiate the rulemaking process. And then just to clarify my statement on fees, what we have here in 360 is setting it at the statutory level with what's in our with what's currently in statute for the level for approval of CE courses. And then within the language itself, it allows for, rather than a 1-year approval window, the 3-year that had been discussed and agreed upon by the committee and the board. And like I said, we'd really like to initiate this rulemaking process and get it started. And if through the development of a more complex fiscal analysis, we realize any type of changes that could be made, particularly coming to thinking of, if and when we get to the point of developing electronic submission, there's going to be considerable changes in the amount of staff time involved, so we can adjust those fees. But beyond that, we believe the language is ready to go, and we'd like the board's approval to kickstart the rulemaking process.
Thank you. I have a quick question. So is there any form, application form or otherwise, that at some point is not anticipated to be available electronically or as an online form?
We are working on the development of the entire continuing education functionality in the Connect system, and we plan to have each of the processes in regulation available through Connect, and the majority could be automated, such as adding course dates and locations. There's certain things we could set that don't even require review by staff.
Yeah, thank you. That's amazing. Thank you very much. I have one further question. So there's still a potential for some non-substantive changes to some of the language, or is it just the fees?
So if the board approves the language, we would move forward with developing the regulation package and submitting it to the director and agency for formal review and approval. Within the board's approval of a rulemaking package, you generally would extend approval for me to make any non-substantive or technical changes to the language. I cannot make any substantive changes without bringing it back to the board for formal approval. So it would just be, adding commas and other things that don't have any real effect on the regulation.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much to staff and to everybody. This was a this just getting to this point today has been a very, very heavy lift, and so it's been a lot of hard work for a lot of people here. So thank you all very much. I have no other questions or comments.
I just have one. On the implementation date, January 1, 2025, if this makes it through the rulemaking process prior to that, is there anything that bars us from implementing it upon approval before that date, or is it we're looking at this won't even happen until 2025?
Thank you for asking that question. It was actually a point that I meant to clarify as well. So looking at 361, when we're talking about the implementation date, we're talking about the compliance date for the licensees that they must comply. So keep in mind that when licensees are doing their renewal, their continuing education runs 1 year prior. So we're building in time there for the rest of the regulations would become effective when they become effective. And then we've set a future implementation date of January 1, 2025 to allow sufficient time for providers to then apply for new courses, get them approved, and actually allow licensees time. A January 2025 renewal licensee needs time to actually take new courses potentially that would qualify there. So that's the purpose of that January 1, 2025 implementation date. We are trying to get the regulations done and in effect ideally by the beginning of next year, 2024, and then building in an additional year for education and getting everybody up to speed and into compliance with the new regulation.
That's what I thought you'd said before. I just wanted to clarify that. I have nothing else. I so appreciate the staff and your time and your leadership on this, and for the committee. It's been this 6 months we've hit warp speed. So thank you for that, and great staff efforts on this part as well. Thank you.
Any other comments, questions from any of the board members? I would entertain it. Hearing none, I would entertain a motion.
I'd like to make a motion.
Please.
Approve the proposed. I'm getting feedback. Is there feedback?
A little echo.
Did somebody unmute? Oh, okay, we're good. Approve the proposed regulatory text for California Code of Regulations, Title 16, Sections 360 to 364 in the attachment. Direct staff to submit the text to the Director of the Department of Consumer Affairs and the Businesses, Consumer Services, and Housing Agency for review, and if no adverse comments are received, authorize the executive officer to take all steps necessary to initiate the rulemaking process. Make any non-substantive or technical changes to the package and set the matter for a hearing if requested. If no adverse comments are received during the 45-day comment period and no hearing is requested, authorize the executive officer to take all steps necessary to complete the rulemaking and adopt the proposed regulations for CCR Title 16, Sections 360 to 364 as noticed.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you. Moderator, can we please take agenda item 17 for public comment?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've opened up the question and answer panel. If any member of the public would like to comment on agenda item 17, please type comment using the field in the lower right-hand corner of your screen and submit it to all panelists, or simply raise your hand. We are displaying instructions and we'll give you a moment. All right, I see no requests for comment. Shall I close the Q&A panel?
Yes, please.
Okay, it's closed.
Okay. And Mr. Sweet, will you please call the roll for the vote on the motion?
Yes. Dr. Paris,
Yes.
Dr. Adams,
Absolutely.
Mr. Sweet, yes. Ms. Cruz,
Yes.
and Dr. Daniels.
Yes.
Motion passes. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. I will make one comment on this, and that is that this a lot of this language and this regulatory package has been in development for a lot of years prior, some of it prior to my existence on the board and the previous executive officers. And so I just want to thank everybody, the previous board, and there's been a lot of legacy work that's been done here. And one thing I'm really proud of for all of us, I think, is that we really had, discussions and really detailed discussions and important discussions on a lot of the issues here. And this was really well thought out. So, and I think when you look at the package and the attachments, and even down to the application forms, et cetera, and when the work the staff did, very detailed. And so I'm just really proud of this particular regulatory package. So thank you to everybody.
I'd like to echo that and just thank everybody and for all the hard work that you've all put into it. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. This is really an area where we engaged our stakeholders and had a lot of feedback. And so thanks to everybody, all of our stakeholders and the public that might be on the call and that isn't on the call. Okay. Thank you, everyone. Moving to agenda item 18. Future agenda items. Let me open that to the board members. Are there any future agenda items?
I just wanted to make sure that, I don't know if this is the place to do it, but Bill 765 and 372 are on the agenda. Our discussions and our proposed amendments.
Thank you. Noted.
Thank you for that. Any other future agenda items?
I think I mentioned earlier, kind of just bringing the updates of the kind of strategic plan, impacts of the strategic plan to the governance committee.
Thank you for that. Anything else from the board members? I have two things. I would like us to add to I guess the continuing education committee or the board, a discussion about the acceptable language and the need or not the need to develop acceptable language um, in programs and outlines submitted to the board. Um, and based on the conversation earlier today, it seemed a little bit vague as to whether or not we had any ability to, um, you know, do anything about that, having that crass language and so anyway, I'd like to have a discussion about if we need language around that, or if we already feel like um, we have enough authority to do something about that. And the second thing is I would like to see if we can invite CCE back to a full board meeting and specifically have them go over at the general process of educational assessment for competencies and how they do their work, and then also invite back a stakeholder around competency-based education. I think it'll be good for the board staff and the public to kind of get an overview of that. As we noted, it's coming and it's here, and I think that might be helpful. I have nothing else. Hearing nothing else from the board, moderator, can we open agenda item 18 for public comment?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've opened up the question and answer panel. If any member of the public would like to comment on agenda item 18, please type comment using the field in the lower right-hand corner of the screen and submit it to all panelists, or simply raise your hand. We are displaying instructions and we'll give you a moment. All right, I see no requests for comment. Shall I close the question and answer panel?
Yes, please.
Okay, it's closed.
Okay, everyone's favorite agenda item, 19. Adjournment. I will adjourn this meeting. Thank you, everyone. Thank you to staff. Thanks for hanging in there. I think we covered a lot today. Thank you to the public for attending. Thank you for being involved. Thank you for your public comments today. Very valuable, very helpful. The time is 3:48 p.m. and I will adjourn this meeting. Bye, everyone. Have a good afternoon.